I mean, imagine you just want to change a light bulb and then suddenly some Lovecraftian being rips you from reality. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Library of the Weird. As you may have noticed, I recently trimmed my beard quite a bit because, frankly, it got quite annoying with its length. But talking about more recent things, I want to talk to you today about In That Endlessness R&, a short story collection by Gemma Files. I read this book back in January and it really blew me away. I mean, you may notice a trend here. I don't wait until the end of the video to talk to you about, to give you my final verdict about books. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. It really blew me away because Gemma Files really found very creative things to talk about horror. It felt like nothing I've ever read before, or let's say it felt like nothing contemporary I ever read. So this book was released back in 2021 by Grimscribe Press, and they are pretty famous for their horror releases and especially their short story collections. And this collection went on to win the Bram Stoker Award. You see this on, you see this little symbol here. This basically means I'm quite late with this book because I'm not one of the first who have read this. I bought this after it already got the Bram Stoker Award. But let's talk a bit about Gemma Files first. Gemma Files is a Canadian author of mainly horror stories, but she's also written other things. She's worked as a journalist and mainly as a film critic and also as a teacher at university. She started publishing her stories in the early 90s and has put out tons of stories since then. Some of those went to win prizes. For example, she won the Shirley Jackson Award. This book here won the Bram Stoker Award. She's won the International Horror Guild Award and other awards. And some of her stories even have been adapted to TV. There's a TV show called The Hunger, which features some of her stories. And another very exciting thing is since, I believe, last year, she has a podcast which she hosts together with British horror writer Simon Bestwick. There they talk a lot about horror in general and especially weird fiction in general, but they also interview other writers. For example, they interviewed Hailey Piper, who is the author of The Worm and His Kings, and I can really recommend this podcast. But let's talk a bit about this collection. It features 15 stories. It also features a very nice cover art, which has, I don't know if you can really see this, but this thing here has like some weird symbols over its head, and yeah, I like the look of the story, the look of the cover. It's made by Jesse Pepper, and the cover design was made by John Paget. So maybe you can look them up and find more of their work. And talking about the stories, I won't be doing my usual let's talk about 3 stories. I basically want to talk in general about the stories. I mentioned some of them, but mostly I want to talk about how the stories are written, because it's, like I said, it's Gemma found really interesting things or interesting narrative devices, or interesting ways to tell the stories she did. Basically, all the stories can be filed under horror. Some of them lean into science fiction, others lean into fantasy, but all of them are horror. And some of them are set a bit in the future or a bit in the past, most of them are taking place in the version of our world and take place at the time we're currently living in. I think that basically makes the stories rather realistic, but they're also very, very insane at the same time, and I really loved that about this book. All the stories feel really unique. Like I said, most of the stories feel like nothing you've ever read before. At least I've read before. And just to give you some examples, I feel like most of the stories feel like Gemma sat at her desk and put out a paper and tried to write, what if this happens? What would the world be like if something like this happens? Like, what would the world look like if we all suddenly got doppelgangers? What if there was a house in my neighborhood that switched places and no one noticed? What if you found yourself in a haunted movie? And exploring those ideas and reading those ideas was really fun. And this leads to really weird and horrifying stories. And they also can make you laugh sometimes. So it's really, there's a roller coaster of emotions in this collection. Gemma also uses very unique and exciting writing styles or narrative styles. Most of the stories are written in first person, I believe, but then there are some that feel a bit like found footage stories. Like, 100 years ago, people were writing a lot of I struggle to find the English word. It's probably something like letter novels, like people writing letters to each other, and you have nothing else than the letters to follow the story of the book. Dracula is a famous example of this. And Gemma takes a very modern approach. She uses emails, she uses chat messages, and that makes some of it feel a bit like found footage. Like, there's one story which starts as an email exchange, but it's basically a podcast. They're interviewing someone, and there's another interview story in here, and that really changes the perspective of how you understand the story or how you read the story. I believe it's a bit it takes a bit of work, I think, because it's not something or at least I'm not used to, but I really liked the way Gemma wrote those stories. She's also using other, let's say, super modern things. Like there's references to famous websites, and I usually don't really like that kind of stuff. As you know, I'm more into gothic stories or medieval stories or stories where you don't really know when they take place or when they took place. And with most of the stories in here, because of the pop culture references or the references to famous websites and stuff like that, you know, okay, most of the stories are set maybe in the 2010s or something like that. But I think the way Gemma writes it, it really, really works. At least it worked for me. The story I like the most in this collection is called Look Up, and it's basically my favorite story because it features heavy folk elements, and I really love stories that feature folk elements or like traditional folkish traditions and stuff like that. It's written in second person, which you don't see very often. For many people, I know for many people it's kind of weird, and there's one book. This is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and it went on to win the Hugo Award. All the books in the Broken Earth trilogy won the Hugo Award for Best Novel. And it, at least the first book, very heavily features features a second person narrative. And I've read on Goodreads and other sites that people just quit the book because they couldn't get into it. But I think it's a different thing with short stories, because you don't have to commit so much time with a narrative that is that you probably don't like or find weird. But as you read the story, it kind of makes sense, because you feel like there's a person talking to the main character. The main character is a girl or a young woman, and she travels with her family to a gathering of the family of her dad's. Her dad is originally from Latvia, or was from Latvia, because he's dead, and the family on his father's side is from Latvia as well, of course. And they want to celebrate the birthday of a person called Elder. And this is the first time I believe it's the very first time she met her family. And yeah, it takes really, really weird turns. It kind of features two narratives. One is the main viewpoint of the young woman, which is still written in second person. And then there's a narrative where it's more clear that a person or thing is talking to the young woman, and you don't really know. I think it's never really revealed if she hears the person talking to her or if not, but it's quite weird. And I want to read you a part of this. Of the second narrative, and I think you'll notice why I love this. So it says here, I sat on a pile of my ancestors' bones there, stacked high, all those others of my blood who had died for the land again and again, burned skulls and boiled ribs, jaws and teeth and empty eyes, cauldron-cracked femurs and gnawed clean vertebrae, with all of it painted in fresh flowers and veined green. A midden heap left to mulch beneath ancient ivy, we were willing to die, I and they, raised to it from birth, but we died only to keep our lands ours, no one else's, an act of taking and retaking, never of giving, the visible sign and seal on 1,000 years' worth of ownership. Being a king meant something very different then. And I think this is a very, very powerful image. And yeah, the story takes a few turns, and I really did vibe with it. I very much liked this story. And with that, I'm finished talking about the stories in this book. Another thing the book is really good at least in my point of view as a cis straight white guy, is that it's quite good at representation. There's a lot of non-cis, non-heteronormal people in here, and it, at least in my eyes, it doesn't feel forced. Like Gemma doesn't make a point of, look, I wrote a story with a gay person in it. It just feels very normal. And as I said in the beginning, I really enjoyed the book. It's only 330 pages long. The stories are all very exciting. I think there's no story in here where I was like, yeah, okay, I don't really get the story, or I don't really like the story. I liked all of them, and I believe, at least on surface level, I understood all of the stories, and that's not a given with weird horror. Like, for example, if you read Thomas Lee Gotti or H.P. Lovecraft, there's lots of stories that kind of go over your head, mostly because they write very dense prose, and the stories in here are not dense. I think they're more on the entertaining side. You don't have to work to understand them. So all I can do at this point is recommend this book to you. I really urge you to read it. It's very good. Please leave a comment if you already read this. Leave a comment if you plan to read it, if I helped you with your decision making, and I hope you liked my video. And with that, see you next week for my recap of my February 2023 in books. Goodbye.